Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another video, and today we are going to be respraying this entire clubby board. The customers bought this board second hand. They want to customize it for themselves and make it look brand new, so they've kindly stripped off all the handles and all the knee pads for me and given me a plan on how they want their paint job to look, so let's go on with it. Here is the colour scheme that they want to go on with. Obviously this is a Sonic, not a Dolphin, but they want the same logo placement as this Dolphin has, just obviously Sonic logos instead. When the customers dropped the board off, we went through the fantastic Molotov book of colours, so we've selected our two colours. They are ordered in at this stage and on their way, so we have to start by prepping this board obviously, which will probably take a little bit of time. Pulling the protective tape off the tail and the nose will be one of the first jobs we have to do. All these clubby boards have these, they just protect from dings and paint chips. Removing any wax that's on the board is going to be next, and then where they've pulled the original knee pads off, it's left this glue behind, so we're going to have to clean all that off, get it all off before we start sanding. Protective stickers aren't going to be too difficult. We'll start it off with the metal blade, just prying it open a bit, and then just using the hands we'll pull them back. These stickers do leave a fair bit of glue behind as well, so we're going to have to get the wax and grease remover and wipe all that clean too before we can start sanding. Doing all this with a camera in hand is pretty difficult, but there's always the foot to help with a bit of leverage. And once you've got them going, they're not that difficult to get off. They peel back pretty easy. They quite often take a bit of paint with them, which is annoying if you're only repairing dings, but in this case it doesn't matter how much paint it takes off. Next step, we're going to move on with the wax, so just with the metal scraper, scrape as much back as possible. We'll have to go over with the degreaser anyway, but want to remove that bulk. And same deal with the glue from the knee pads. I'm just going to use the metal scraper to get the biggest bits off, just because there's less cleanup with the degreaser then. So we'll remove those big bits and then we'll drown it in degreaser. This is just an engine degreaser, so it costs like $7 from the petrol station or the servo, depending where you live, or gas station, I guess, for you Americans. Once we've got a bit of a decent pool of degreaser, we're going to leave that to soak and just use the heat gun and a rag just to wipe off any excess wax that's on the side. Where we've scraped with our metal scraper, we'll use the heat gun to get rid of any remnants, and then we can go over all of that with the degreaser and a rag as well. We'll heat up that glue from the ding tape as well, from the tail and the nose. Just let that soak a little bit. We don't need quite as much for the wax, but definitely for this glue from the tape, we'll get a good dosage on that. This stuff's really good because it's paint safe, it's fiberglass safe, so you don't have to be too scared to use it. It's going to get rid of all that excess wax. I'll re-drown where the glue was on the knee pads too, because I really don't want to deal with that for too long. So get it good and wet, nice and soaked out, so it all just scrapes off at the end. And just using the metal scraper here, most of this black line is actually sand that's been caught under the ding tape, so I'm just going to remove that roughly with the scraper, and then we'll leave it for a little bit to melt that glue. I normally let that soak for 10 minutes or so before I start to hit the glue, just slowly wiping it off, trying not to spread it too much, but removing it, getting it stuck to the rag, and then going over where all the wax was again as well. The reason I'm doing this mostly is so when it comes time to sanding, I'm not burning through sandpaper with it all being clogged up with wax and glue and all the rest, so I want the surface really clean before sanding. Where the knee pads sit is usually the worst bit. There's heaps of glue on them. It's a big sticky mess. It'll quite often take more than one stage of spraying, soaking, scraping to remove all of this gunky crap off the board before it's sort of at a stage where we can buzz sandpaper over it and not end up with big balls of sticky glue ruining our sandpaper. Just a brief intermission while we're playing with gooey goop here. In the last video I told you that only 29.4% of people watching my videos are subscribed. I'm proud to say we're up to 30.3% right now. Let's see if we can get that up to 35% by the next video. Subscribing is free, it's very helpful, don't be scared, hit the button. And cheer to you guys that hit the subscribe button after the last video. Appreciate it, guys. Choo! So once we're free of all that slimy crap, we can start thinking about sanding. You can see all these black lines, these pinstripes, same on the other side with the Sonic logo. Anywhere that the original painter has masked off and created a paint edge, we need to feather all of those edges out, because those edges will show up if they're not removed underneath our new coat of paint. So I'm just going to go around the whole thing and work with 120 and just make sure all of those paint edges, those color differences are all feathered out, so we've got a nice clean surface to start thinking about repairs and then painting. And that's it. 30 seconds later, thanks to time lapse, all of our sanding is done, so that wasn't too painful. There are some areas for repair on this board. The tail has some chips out of it, the nose actually needs quite a bit of repair. Nothing too major, but it's going to need a bit of cloth. There's some weak patches around. Where all the handles were as well, it's kind of worn out and weak, so I'm going to re-glass over all of these handle areas as well. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to skip the repair stage of this, because I do have quite a few epoxy repairs on the channel already and a few on these particular clubby boards. So we're going to come back and the whole thing is going to be repaired and ready to start painting.
Few inches later.
And hey presto, just like that, we're all repaired. All the handles have been, or handle areas have been glassed over. The nose has been done, the tail's been done, a few little weak patches here and there, all done. So my first step is going to be to re-drill out the holes where the screws go that mount the handles. I don't know the science behind the handle placement, so without the holes I don't actually know where to put them. And if I paint it as is, I'm going to lose that placement. So we're going to open those holes up so they show at the end, and we can just reattach the handles straight away. So in order to get to this stage and start painting, the whole board has been sanded to a wet 400. So once that resin on the repairs was cured, I sanded all those repairs with 240 on the orbital and the entire board, then the repairs and the entire board with 320 on the orbital, then the whole board, everything 320 wet, and then 400 wet at the end, and that brings us to this stage. If the board was in worse condition than it is after the repairs were done, it would be worth breaking out the spray gun setup and giving the full board a priming coat, ideally a white primer, but even with a grey primer, and then re-wet sanding the entire thing. But I'm pretty happy with how all my paint edges have come out, and I'm happy with how smooth my repairs have come out, so I've sort of opted just to start painting basically. So on the final product that the customer wants, they're going to have white logos inside their coloured areas, and they're going to have this white cigar band through the middle of the board. So I'm basically just applying my base layer of white. Once this is all cured, it's all going to be wet sanded again with 400, and then we'll keep going with the rest of the painting. I'm intentionally going to lay down more white paint than we need, so a larger area, because once this is cured, we're going to wet sand the white paint with 400 wet again, and I need that space so that I can feather the edges of the paint, the same as we've done with the original paint, without making that white area too small for our final result. So I'm going much larger than I need to in preparation for sanding. Every area gets 3 coats of white paint, pretty heavy coats, so we've got ample coverage, and changing direction each coat. So going one way on the first coat, going the other way on the second coat, and going the same way as the first coat on the third. Once that paint's cured, we come back to it the next day, just giving it a quick buzz with some 320 on the orbital, and then I'll resand the entire board 400 wet again, and we are ready to start masking up for some colour. So because my customers ordered a new fin, new handles and new knee pads for this board, they ordered them direct from Sonic, so while they were there they asked Sonic to do up some logos. So these are just die cut stickers. If you want to get your own made up, just look up your local sign writer and you can send them what you want file wise, and they can print these die cut stickers. I'm going to leave this one over the carbon because I think it's the customer's son's name, so it's going to pop a little more once that carbon's all polished up, but the rest, which are the Sonic logos, they're all going to go on our white patches. This is obviously a darker colour than our initial white, so the coverage is a lot better, which is nice, but we're still going to go 3 coats of this colour, and we're always going to start by coating our edges and our rails first, so that we're not putting overspray onto our big flat areas like the deck of the board and around the fin box. If we were to do those big flat areas first and then do the sides, we're actually misting overspray onto our big flat areas, and it's going to give us a really dry paint job. So always start with those edges and then work your way to these big open face areas.
Who knows? Can you feel it? Who cares? Can you see? Like the sun in my soul, sun in my soul. So it goes.
Once our 3 coats of colour have been put down, we're going to let them tack off for about 15 minutes before coming back and applying 2 coats of clear gloss. Putting on pretty heavy to try and get a nice wet finish to minimise the amount of sanding we need to do and make our polish come up as best as humanly possible. I'll let that sit for about 20 minutes, but that's going to depend on the temperature of wherever you're spraying. But once it's touch dry, so if my sleeve or my wrist touches the paint at this point, it doesn't really matter. But I don't want the paint to be fully cured, because when I'm lifting these stickers back up, if it's fully cured, I might break or crack the paint around the sticker. So I still want it to be slightly gummy as I'm peeling. I took quite a bit of time before filming to kind of work out whereabouts these stickers are going to go. You can definitely use some pencil or something to mark your placement, but for the most part I just kind of freehanded this and tried to get them symmetrical both sides. These big stickers can be a little harder to work with, but you want to start at one end and work your way to the other to get it adhered down, just to avoid air bubbles, so work your way evenly. And then I always use the backing paper from the sticker to kind of smear everything down flat as hard as I can. It just covers more surface area than your fingers do. And then once you pull that top sheet off, or whatever that is, then I use that backing paper again to individually push the edges of each letter down so that they're nice and tight and sealed. You can see here how much bigger my white area was painted than I needed, so I know I have enough coverage. The sticker had options of where it could go. Once all that paint was applied and cured, the next day I went back and sanded everything with 800 grit wet. So the whole board is sanded at 800 at this point, and then masked off, preparing for these black pinstripes, which just has 2 light coats and then 2 clear coats over the top, and that's it. All of our paint is applied. Because the entire board has been sanded to 800 before I applied those pinstripes, I can now go ahead and sand everything, including the pinstripes, with 1200 wet, and we're done, ready for polish straight away, ready for those knee pads and those handles to go back on. And that's it, you guys. We did it. That was one hell of a job, but it was definitely worth it in the long run. I think it came up pretty good. Tell me what you think. If you got any questions, let me know. I wasn't so sure about the design when I saw it on paper, but seeing it in real life, looking all shiny and brand new, this board means absolute business, and I wouldn't want to race this guy on a board that looks this sharp. Cheers for watching once again, guys. Really appreciate it. Like I said earlier, if you haven't hit the subscribe button, hit the bloody button. It's free, it doesn't cost a thing. Do it, and we'll see you in the next one. Chee-hoo!